Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar on the public budget. My name's Kerry Tocock. I'm the Head of Customer and Communications at Wiltshire Council. If you wish to see closed captions of the speaker's words, please click on the CC button on the bottom right of the screen. They should then appear after 30 seconds or so. The system sometimes takes a little while to get warmed up. If you have any technical issues, then they are usually solved by closing down the meeting link and then rejoining. You are welcome to submit a question to be answered using the chat function, and also please leave your name. Our presenters will verbally answer as many as they're able to a little later on. Some of you have also pre-submitted questions for this evening, and we'll try to answer those later on as well. Thank you to those of you who have sent questions in. In a short while, you'll be hearing from Cllr Nick Botterill, Cabinet Member for Finance, but to get things started, please let me hand you over to the Leader of the Council, Councillor Richard Clewer.
Thank you, Kerry. Good evening, everyone. Yes, I'm Richard Cllr, Leader of Wiltshire Council. Council budgets are not always the most exciting of topics. They don't always make the headlines, but you only have to look at recent news articles, including 9 o'clock news on some channels or the evening news, to see that at the moment they are getting an awful lot of attention, and a lot of attention in many cases for the wrong reasons. They can have a huge impact on the services that councils are able to provide, particularly when things go wrong in them. And as a result, certainly from our perspective, running Wiltshire Council, they are incredibly important. They are the top topic whenever we have a meeting. I always work on the principle of finance first. So, yeah, they can be quite complex. There's an awful lot of jargon around them, but also an awful lot of, I don't know, smoke and mirrors in some cases, not in Wiltshire's. And I thought before I let Nick get into some of the details, it was probably worth doing a bit of scene setting about where we are. It is hugely challenging for the local government sector as a whole at the moment, hugely challenging. But I want to be really clear from the start that is not the position that Wiltshire Council are in. I'll explain in a little more detail, but we are in a good, sound position in terms of our finances, and we are well, we're able to do that for a number of reasons. We'll run through some of them later. But the news headlines that you're hearing are not things that you need to worry about applying to your council, providing you're in Wiltshire. I would say, in my experience as a councillor, which goes back an awfully long way, and as leader, this is the trickiest set of budget proposals we've had to deal with. A couple of reasons for that. Every year, the pressures around adult social care and children's social care get a little worse. They do. It becomes a slightly larger portion of our budget, and that's always stressful. It's always hard, challenging to manage. But the main factor this year was that we got an early Christmas present from Westminster. I think it was the 13th of December it came through, when they, having previously in late November told us it'd be a cash flat budget, we'd see the grants that we get rolled over, and we don't get many grants from government. We suddenly learned that we were losing about £7 million. So that made for a less than restful Christmas. It's quite a significant gap to suddenly have to resolve. And I do think it's worth commenting on what happened in terms of rural councils there. There were 3 grants that were simply scrapped. The one that gave us the most amount of money was the Rural Services Delivery Grant. That was worth about £4.5 million to us. And that was a grant that was put in by previous governments to deal with the 20% most rural authorities in the UK, because it's significantly more expensive to deliver domiciliary care, social care, to an adult in their house if you've got to drive 35 minutes on rural roads to get to that property, and then when you're done, you've possibly got your next client not in the same small village, but you've then got to get to a village on the other side of the market town, so another long drive. There are a collection of wastes. There are significant challenges in service delivery in rural areas, and I think it was pretty punitive of government to remove that funding. And to be blunt, it was taken from us as rural shire counties or rural authorities, and instead it was taken and reallocated to northern metropolitan areas. It doesn't take a genius to work out which ones vote in whichever different ways, and I think government really got that wrong. There were two other grants. There was something called the Services Grant, which is about 400,000 to us, and a minimum funding guarantee. And I think that's also important. That was worth about 1.3 million. Minimum funding guarantee is a grant that had been brought in place as the taps were being turned back on for local council funding to ensure that councils like Wiltshire, which really don't get much money from central government, got a top up so that our funding was increasing at least to a minimum level alongside other councils in the UK. And again, that's gone. Government are obsessed with something they call core spending power. They will argue, and if I put a press release out, they will instantly come back with core spending power has increased by 6.8% or whatever it is. Core spending power is a bit of a joke in government term, or in my view, it's a bit of a joke because it also includes in it the council tax that councils raise. So you're expected to put tax up to increase your core spending power. But even on government's measures, our core spending power increase was only 4-point-something%. So national insurance, we lost, or we got less money than we were expecting in terms of national insurance. All government, all of the public sector was assured that we would have national insurance funding provided to meet the extra demand of the increases in employers' national insurance. But we're still working out some of the final numbers, even after getting the local government settlement yesterday. But we're somewhere like £750,000 adrift there. And honestly, government, I think, have really messed up here. They seem to have forgotten, for example, that the housing revenue account is part of a council. Housing revenue account employs staff, but they were completely missed off government's calculations. Public health was missed off government's calculations. Honestly, you wouldn't make it up. You couldn't make it up. Well, unless you were on a particularly sort of sarcastic BBC sitcom. Other channels are available. So we did get some extra funding from government, so it wasn't all doom and gloom. They repackaged some children's funding. We got about 2.4 million there. Actually, technically speaking, we lost about 100,000. There is a little additional money that's come in there, so that may level out, but it's really very small scale. Any change at this stage, and we got some extra funding, as all councils that deliver adult social care did, around 4.8 million. There was also some extra funding that came in around something called extended producer responsibility. This is a part of the Environment Act to move towards boosting recycling. We have to treat it as one-off funding. It's designed in it really for the transformation of waste services to deal with the Environment Act. It came in at probably 7.6 million. It might go up a little, but that has to be ring-fenced and has to be used very clearly for waste transformation. Now, all councils by law have to balance our books. It's a pretty simple statement. We've got to do it. It's a legal requirement. But there's an art to the writing of council budget papers in many authorities, not, I'd be really clear to add, in Wiltshire, of hiding ways of balancing your books. So at the moment, a number of councils around us have been using reserves to balance their books, basically using their savings to pay for today's shopping. That is not a sustainable way to behave. I want to be really clear, Wiltshire is not doing that. In fact, over the last 4 years, we've added to our reserves. We have spent elements of reserves, we've added to other reserves. Overall, we are in a position where we are looking to save money and not reduce reserves. And the new wheeze that's coming in is exceptional financial support. I give you very good odds. You'll hear this at some point in the media over the course of the next 2-3 weeks. And this is where councils basically ask government for permission to either borrow money to balance their books for day-to-day spending, or to sell buildings and use that receipt to balance their books. Both of those are one-off. And again, I think they're really poor. I'm extremely concerned for local government as a whole that this is being allowed. I'm even aware of one council not too far away from us, just down on the coast, that is using or wants to use exceptional financial support to pay the interest on the exceptional financial support they had last year. I mean, that's basically using one credit card to pay off another credit card to pay for your shopping. It cannot end well. And again, I want to be really clear. That is not the position that Wiltshire is in. We are able to balance our books without using reserves, without resorting to any other form of trickery, through the tax that we raise through council tax and the other forms of income we've got. And Nick will run through some of the detail there. it really, I mean, I cannot overemphasize how important that is, and how important it is to understand our position as a result. Inflation is a significant challenge. It's been a challenge for a number of years now for all of us. Inflation, from a council point of view, has tended to be higher than national inflation, and contract inflation has been rising significantly. Over the next 3 years, we would expect contract inflation to be about 33.1 million. 13.3 million of that is coming next year. It means we've got to be working really hard to make sure our contracts are efficient, to make sure that we are only spending money in a way that's going to be effective, and to make sure that we are transforming services and really looking to the future, looking to the future of the way we need to deliver services to keep control of our budgets and keep delivering them effectively. Governments have not made they've not shied away from the fact that this local government settlement is basically designed to force us all to put up council tax. It's basically government have told us you should put up council tax to 5%. Nick can give you the actual detail of what we're proposing in a second. But that is frustrating. That is government pushing taxation down onto local authorities. There are elements of local authority delivery, social care in particular, that aren't going to be solved by just pushing up council tax. They're going to need significant reform. Special educational needs is going to need national reform driven by Westminster. And the longer Westminster keep kicking these cans down the road, the worse it gets. So I think that's probably enough from me. I'll pass you over to Nick, who can run through our budget proposals, and then I'll be back in a bit. So Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Richard, for that. And well, I guess most people will be pleased to know that I'm not proposing to recite all 180 pages of the budget papers, but I do want to take you through some of the headlines of the decisions we've made and are proposing here. So the proposed Wiltshire Council net budget, and all councils work on net budgets, for 25-26 is £527 million. I'm rounding to the nearest million. That's a rise of around 7% on last year's total of around £490 million. The proposals see a net 37 million increase in service expenditure. In services, that's compared to last year, and ensuring that the resources are provided to support the delivery of the council's business plan. Around £53 million of gross pressure has been added into the service budgets for next year to support the delivery of services which are focused on protecting adults, preventative activities and early help services. And this will ensure that we are able to continue to deliver the best outcomes for the residents of Wiltshire. Due to Wiltshire Council's strong financial position, as Richard said, compared to many other councils, we're not proposing to increase council tax by the full amount permitted by government next year. It's proposed that the adult social care levy element is taken in full, and that reflects the fact that there are extreme demand pressures, and we're experiencing high price inflation in these areas. Alone, this area is looking at something like a £20 million upward year-on-year pressure. The levy will raise £7 million, so it only goes some way to alleviating that or to providing cover for that upward pressure. But we are going to take it in full. That's the intention. General council tax planned to rise by 2.5%, and this is lower than previous years, recent years. And that reflects the council's tight control of its finances and its costs, which are and also some very some areas where there's buoyant income levels coming through. These are generally non-social care areas, so those are doing quite well for reasons of cost control and buoyant income. So to summarise, we're proposing therefore to set the council tax for 25-26 with a bandy charge at £1,887, and that represents a 4.5% increase in total. That's the 2% adult social care levy plus the 2.5% general rise. This equates to about £1.56 per week for a bandee, but that sum will raise, or that levy will raise 369 million pounds next year. That's the vast bulk of the money. If you remember, I said 527 million. Well, 368.8 or 369 will come from the council tax. We received nearly 82% of our entire money for the net budget from council tax and business rates. And our services are dependent very much on those. So, I mean, we didn't want to plan to have more than a 2.99 total percent rise in council tax for this year, but it's been absolutely necessary to go for 4.5. Vast majority of councils, as Richard has said, will be increasing their council tax by more than Wiltshire. In fact, at the moment, I'm only aware of 2 councils nationwide which are proposing lower rises. If you could put the graphic on the screen, please. I'd just like to take people through the areas in which we spend our net budget. So here, for every £100 of core funding that we receive to fund services, £38 is spent on caring for vulnerable adults, £21 on supporting and safeguarding our children and young people. So you can see those 2 services, which a lot of people don't actually appreciate that we provide. £59 out of every 100 that we spend goes on those 2 services. We're looking further down, £10 goes on managing Wiltshire's waste and protecting the environment. Waste management is an increasingly complex area, a lot of legislation, a lot more legislation coming. And we have over 200,000 residences that we provide domestic collection of recycling and general waste and bottles every fortnight. So, this is a sizable operation. £8 is spent on maintaining highways and subsidising local bus services. A lot of the money that's spent on highways is actually capital spend, but this is the revenue element that we're showing here. £9 on funding the investment in Wiltshire schools, roads and housing. £5 actually on running the council, and that's not just paying councillors, that's all the professional officers and the various things which have to be supported to operate the council. £4 on the council's quite extensive property assets, and if you think it's not just buildings like County Hall, it's all the libraries, all the leisure centres. There's a huge property portfolio that is supported across the county. £3 on our online and digital services, £1 on Wiltshire's leisure and libraries, that's the running operation of those, and £1 on improving Wiltshire's economy. And that's where we seek to improve the prosperity of our county. So that's a fairly crude summary of how every £100 is spent under those general headings, but I think it gives people a good idea of where the money goes. I'd just like to talk about the next few years as well as the next immediate year. And we do set out our plans in what's called the medium-term financial strategy, which is next year and the 2 years following from that. And we are trying to build into that forecast all the demand pressures, the increased demand pressures that we're seeing, and the additional people that we are going to be required to support, and also the rising cost of that, providing that support, which is due to both general inflation, price inflation, as well as some of those sectors have specific problems associated with them. Consideration has also been made for the budget pressures experienced already this year, So in 24-25, our financial year runs from April the 1st, 24 to 31st of March 25. We have seen increased costs that have been necessary to sustain services, mostly in adult social care, I have to say, and some of those care packages that we provide have been, the costs have gone up during the year since the budgets were set. So we've actually taken into account those in setting the budget for next year. So that's quite a prudent move. Another part of council finances that you might hear about are reserves. Richard talked about those. And the reserves are the funds council set aside for unforeseen costs, future projects, or specifically earmarked against certain items. We've always had a strong ethos. It's important we have plenty of money in reserve, and that we should cover the costs, cover the areas that we know that there is potential risk in. So we've ensured that the reserves for next year are going to be at the general reserves at £34 million, and that's a figure that we've agreed by analysing the potential financial risks that we face as a council. So we are not using our reserves to plug holes in our revenue accounts. We are maintaining our reserves for the purpose that they are set aside for, which is to provide a buffer against unforeseen costs and for a rainy day. And on that note, I will pass you back to Richard, who will take you forward on some of the service areas.
Thanks. So I said I'd come on to sort of some of the reasons why we think we are bucking the trend, why we are doing well, why we are able to invest in services and not cut them. I think it comes down to two things. One is taking a long-term view, understanding what challenges we have on the horizon. We're all getting older. The population of Wiltshire is getting older, and many people moving into Wiltshire tend to be older, and therefore will continue to have a disproportionate number of more elderly people in our population. For example, when you look at and study and understand what is coming, it helps you adjust and work out how to rise to and address those challenges. And the other thing, and this is something I'm hugely passionate about, is prevention. Prevention is a tough thing to do as a council, particularly with financial pressures, because it means investing now for savings in the future, for savings that will come in 2, 3, 4 years' time. I am absolutely rigorous when we discuss changes, transformation, and so on with officers. If something is there that will reduce prevention, I'm not willing to consider it, because prevention is so key to controlling our costs, but much more importantly, providing a better quality of life for the more vulnerable people in society, those we've got to look after, and that prevention is definitely paying off. Now, don't just take my word for it. We get inspected. All of us local authorities get all sorts of inspections. We have 3 recent inspections. We've got our Ofsted, where we were rated as outstanding, the best possible result. We had the SEND, Special Educational Needs Service, which also gave us the top result. And we've just had our Care Quality Commission result, which has come in with a good. I am not aware of any other large council in the country that can that has got that range of external verification of the services we're delivering. Now, I don't pretend everything's perfect. We're a council. There are always mistakes. There are always issues. But it shows that prevention is working, and I'm immensely proud as leader with all the staff who've delivered that, and with the rigorous focus on preventative services, which are referenced time and time again in those reports if you take time to read them. We are not just, I know most of you will see us as people who mend the roads and empty bins, but as Nick has covered, social care, fundamentally, we are a social care provider who happens to empty your bins and repair your roads. And adult social care is a distinct challenge. It's a definite strain on our budgets in terms of this year, and it's an area where we are having to continue to put additional support and additional funding into. So again, all of that work is around prevention, whether it be prevention through the use of technology or prevention through the use of services to keep people living independently for longer, reablement. It underlies everything that we're doing there. But prevention doesn't just have to be in social care. I mean, our number of looked after children is pretty stable because of that work. If you look at most councils, it's just going up. So, but if you look, for example, on highways, we've put an additional £1 million a year into preventative maintenance around flooding. We are getting a huge amount of rain. It's become a significant challenge, and that work to try and address some of those issues, particularly where they're involving highways, I think is really important, because it will not only preserve our highways, keep them good for longer, but it also is a safety issue. We don't want standing water on the roads. We've had funding from government around bus service improvement plans, where we're looking at demand responsive transport, not necessarily prevention in its own right, but trying to come up with a more effective way of dealing with transport in largely rural areas, where honestly minibuses are more appropriate than large buses with 3 people riding around on country roads. We talked about roads. We allocated 10 million extra last year. We've got an additional 10 million proposed to go in this year's budget. That's on top of extra funding that we've already put in, and there is some extra money coming from government. So this next year's budget, we should see, instead of the normal 23 million, something much closer to 43 million going in on our roads. And we know from external evidence, from the Department for Transport data, that our roads are improving. I don't pretend they're perfect. I know there are still potholes out there. There always will be, but we are making progress in dealing with that. Whereas across the country as a whole, the number of roads being fixed, the number of problems it's got worse. In Wiltshire, it's got better. And that is good news. And again, it demonstrates how prevention can pay off. And enforcement, I'm very keen on enforcement. Fly tipping, we've reduced fly tipping by 40% in the county. We need to go further. We need to reduce litter, because again, that harms our environment. It's a form of prevention around planning, not planning per se, but where people breach planning. That again is really critical, because if we can demonstrate that as a council we will come down like a ton of bricks if you break planning rules, you're going to be less likely to break planning rules, which will again be less harm for the environment and less cost from a council perspective. Just going to touch on increases. So if we move to the next slide on what we are looking at in terms of the amount of spend coming in this year's budget. Adult services, 194 million. That's up. Gosh, it's 14, almost 15 million on last year, which demonstrates that the inflationary costs we're seeing there. Children's services and families children's services up 75 million. That's up about 5 million. And then environment and waste, 49.5. That's pretty much level. Highways and transport, 43.4. That is not the money that goes into fixing our roads. That is separate funding. That's capital funding. But the highways and transport funding is there, and it's fallen very slightly, but pretty much on a par. That's the staff costs and a lot of the technical work that goes into keeping the highways network running. And then education and skills at 38 million. We are required to consult with you on our budget. Now, we tried something a bit different this year. We had went out to our libraries with a number of boxes and tokens, and we had 140 people, more than 140 people, who came along to the libraries and put tokens in boxes. We didn't give them enough for one in every box, so we asked them to prioritise what was important to them. Nick and I were at all the sessions along with senior officers. It was really actually interesting and fun. Really pleased. I mean, often studies that are carried out by pollsters say that the public don't really care about adults and children. It's more health or the economy. Well, it was really good to know, not surprisingly, working in our libraries, but libraries came top at 15%, but then supporting and safeguarding children, 15%, investing in housing, roads and schools, 13%, and supporting vulnerable adults at 12%. We did the same thing online, and similar results. Maintenance of highways and footpaths came up top, 17%. I'm not surprised, and then supporting and safeguarding children at 13, and supporting vulnerable adults at 12, and then investing in housing, roads, schools, and building at 11. And I actually find that reassuring. I think it's good to know that people are understanding some of that complexity of the service we're providing, and the need to make sure that we're investing in it. The only other thing sort of to cover off there, I've been carrying out Ask the Leader sessions across the county over the course of the last couple of years. I've been doing one a month out in our area boards. It was Pewsey last week. And again, that's been a really good way of understanding what the priorities of residents are. And they do vary quite widely. Some of them, attendance has been comparatively low. A hot summer's day in Trowbridge is not the time to get people out to talk to the council leader. Others have been very good. It's useful to gather that information. I think that's something we need to build on as we move forward, an effective way of finding out what your views really are on services and budgets. I'm going to hand back to Nick now, who's going to talk through the savings. Savings is probably the wrong word, but the savings that we're looking to make.
Thank you, Richard. So Wiltshire Council, as we said, is in a very strong financial position, but just like other councils, we face challenges, and of course we need to make savings. And there is some sensitivity over the word savings, which is a bit of a catch-all phrase, but savings are really part of the everyday life of a dynamic organisation, any dynamic organisation. We're constantly looking at how we can improve what we're doing, how we can make the processes more efficient, better value for money, and all these things. So, you know, don't be frightened of the word savings. The savings are going to be there year after year, and you know, we're going to achieve them, and they're all part of making sure that we are a fit for purpose organisation. Our proposals for next year provide the details of savings totaling £15.4 million. But I would point out that 14.2 million of those were actually included as part of last year's budget setting process and have been previously approved. And that 14.2 million figure has actually been amended to 9 million to reflect known deliverability and timing changes. There are 6.4 million of new savings, and they're part of the cost containment activity which we've been carrying out, and to close the remaining budget gap for 25-26. As we've already mentioned, local authorities are by law obliged to provide a balanced budget, so we can't actually set an unbalanced budget if we want to stay on the right side of the law. The cost containment exercise by the management team will continue, helping the organisation to run as efficiently as possible and to get the most out of every pound that we spend. And a number of other measures which are proposed in order to make some savings are maximising the amount of recycling. The actual recyclates that we collect are worth money, and actually the more we collect, the more money we can get, and so therefore that is effectively a saving for the council if we can collect more recycling. There's an increase in some fees and charges for services in leisure and planning, and we've got quite a number of our services require a fleet of vehicles to deliver them. Vehicles are very expensive. We've got to make sure that we're getting running those as efficiently as possible, that we're getting the right vehicles, and that we're not spending a pound more than we need to on running our fleet. We've been working very closely with further education providers, and also to ensure that school transport services are provided as effectively and as cheaply as possible. There's obviously got to be high levels of quality in those services. Can't just have the very cheapest, but we've got to make sure that they're as value for money effective as possible. We also got to make sure that we have the right staffing and management structures in place that can support the council. And again, that's something which is constantly being reviewed. We don't have the management structure that we had 2 years back or 10 years back. We have the management structure that we need now to deliver the services in the most cost-effective way. One service that we always get asked about, which is very popular, is the garden waste service, and that we're proposing will rise to £75 a year for next year. That still works out at about £1.34 per week, and it is a a great value for money service, really, if you consider the cost of taking your own vehicle and taking stuff to a place to be disposed of, to one of the household recycling centres or somewhere else. So some increases in that service, that collection service. I think we've got questions coming up next, but before that, Richard has alluded to capital, and I think he would like to take you through our capital proposals, which are, we've been talking about our revenue proposals. We also have the capital proposals for next year as well. Richard.
Thanks, Nick. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. I will try and be brief because we've talked a lot and I want to get on to your questions. Everything we've been talking about so far is revenue. It's money that comes in every year and is spent every year. Capital is money that can only be spent once. It can be funded in different ways. Some comes from government in terms of support. So some of the highways investment, for example. Other elements would need to be borrowed depending on the work that we're doing. Our capital programme, the further out you get, the more, or the harder it is to nail down. I mean, the overall capital programme has got over £1 billion in it over many years. The capital programme proposed for this coming year is 253 million. It will probably, it normally is, it's slightly on the high side, some of it slips, but we're getting better and better at being accurate on our capital programme. So the items we've got: council house build and stock refurbishment, 40.5 million. Structural maintenance and bridges, 16.2. The Chippenham bypass, which we've now got confirmation from Department for Transport for, which is great, 13.9 million, completing that. Trowbridge Leisure Centre, it'll cost a total of 24 million, 14 million should be spent this year. If it wasn't dark, I'd be able to look out on the site where that will shortly be being built, which is great news, given the state of the existing leisure facilities in Trowbridge and the fact that they are at the end of their life. Our extra highways investment, on top of the 23.4 million we get from government and the additional money from government this year, we're proposing another 10.4 million on top of that. That will be making significant headway. It won't fix all the problems, but significant headway in improving roads. Schools maintenance, 8.1. Environment and waste, again, 8.1. SEND provision, including Silverwood School and various other projects and improvements, 28.6, a big chunk of budget. And then ultra-fast broadband, where it's a comparatively small amount of money, but we are getting close to the point now of seeing ultra-fast broadband rolling out across most of the county. It still hasn't reached my house, but it's getting there. It's improving all the time, and more improvements are on the way, primarily funded through government, but we are putting some assistance in to just make sure that all the households in areas are going to get that support. I have to be clear at this stage, it's full council that will decide the budget on the 25th of February. It's not been decided. We had it through Cabinet today, but full council's the decision maker. And there are still elements of a scrutiny process to go through. Then most of that is now complete. So I think that sums up where we are with the budget. I think at this point I'd like to move on to deal with whatever questions we've got through. So Kerry, please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you to you and Nick. So the first question I've got is, given the much reported weaknesses in social services, I suggest the budgeted 2% should be 2.49%. Social services, not necessarily in Wiltshire, have contributed to the bed blocking problem and have a history of failure to respond to safeguarding issues. We do not know all issues that may be out there, but it is unbelievable that somebody can say, "It isn't my concern." There appears to be a cultural problem. We cannot expect to have the best services unless we pay for them.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I've mentioned social care a lot through what I've said tonight because it is really important. We are taking the 2% that is ring fenced. It can only be spent on social care, but to deal with the additional spend that we're seeing, the uplift of, well, it's almost 20 million of spend on social care, that will involve far more than just that 2%. So I take the point. When we looked at 2.5%, you can take a maximum of 2% social care. So the rest of it needs to be taken from the sort of what we would call the general fund, general council tax increase. But more importantly, it's absolutely critical that firstly, the government comes up with a proper solution to the provision of social care. It is a system that is nationally creaking at the seams, and also that we work really closely with the health service, the integrated care board, to look at issues like discharge from hospital, making sure people are getting out into good provision with support that helps that preventative work, helps them get independent again, helps them get back on their feet. So yeah, I mean, a really good question. It's a technicality. In reality, the bulk of our council tax increase will end up being spent on social care. That's the nature of the constant increase in our proportions of our budget that we're seeing from the provision of social care, and every other council is seeing.
Thank you, Richard. Nick, the next question is for you. Why do you think it is fair to increase council tax, which will be excessive compared to other areas when people are struggling financially? Do you not feel and see the poverty in Trowbridge? When people see street furniture purchased and the bill for council pensions, do you not think that this increase is unnecessary at this time?
Well, I would very much like to not have a council tax increase for next year. I think people pay large amounts already, but the reality of the situation, and I'm afraid we have to deal with the realities rather than what we would like, is that most of our income comes from council tax and business rates, as I said, 82%. And some of the services, some of them statutory services that we are legally obliged to provide, are experiencing huge increases in demand. Ideally, yes, council taxes shouldn't rise either at all, or if they do, then by no more than the rate of inflation. We actually were hoping to have a lower council tax rise than the one being proposed for this year. But as Richard explained at the beginning of this session, that's not been possible because of the changes to our funding and also some of the internal demands for social care. So, I just want to make sure that we spend every pound we have wisely and that we don't take a pound more off people than we actually need to. But I'm really aware of the cost of living crisis and the pressures that people face, whether they live in Trowbridge or indeed anywhere else in Wiltshire. So this is all about striking the right balance. We are proposing 4.5% as the lowest increase that we absolutely need to continue to provide the services that people have come to rely on.
Thanks, Nick. Richard, the next question's for you. Will there be additional funding in leisure centres and services in the north of the county? Although not a statutory service, they're hugely important for community cohesion, personal health and mental well-being, which can help prevent pressure on services such as the NHS.
Yes, thank you. I mean, that's a really good question. And as has been pointed out, it's not a statutory service, the provision of a leisure service. However, when you look at prevention and when you look at public health and the benefits that come from making sure, particularly in a large rural area like Wiltshire, that we've got good leisure provision across the board, it comes with a significant benefit. And the private sector has struggled to provide leisure facilities or gyms across large parts of Wiltshire. So yes, I mean, the investment is going on everywhere. Trowbridge is the area that currently is getting a significant investment. That's primarily because the current swimming pool in Trowbridge, without pretending to understand the full details of the engineering issues, it's got some sort of a rot in the metal that means it really is close to the end of its life. It's not safe to keep operating for much longer. Therefore, we need to provide a new facility before we get to the stage where the existing one requires massive repair or has to be closed down. We already saw it closed down for a period of time a few years ago to get repairs done to allow us to get to this stage. We have been, because of our financial position, investing significantly in the equipment that's going in. So, for example, Marlborough leisure centre there are improvements going in with equipment and with the upgrading of some of that and upgrading of some of the facilities people have to use. The same thing's happening in Devizes, in leisure centres across the entire county, north and south and east and west. So it's really good for us to be in that position. We're not cutting services, we're investing in them. I really know of no other council that's able to say that right now. The rest of the sector is on its knees.
Thanks, Richard. Nick, next question is for you. The garden waste collection charge has gone up considerably in recent years, and how do you justify that at this time?
Well, the garden waste service is something that isn't provided to, not all residents use the garden waste service. It tends to be people who have gardens, clearly. And we think it's only fair that the cost of this service should be recovered by the people who actually use it, since not everybody does. This is a fairly, well, it's £5 a year increase to £75, but you do get a very good service for that. And I said earlier that just simply taking your garden waste in boxes or bags to the tip in the car would cost considerably more than that in any one year. Each time you did it, you'd be several, £10 or whatever, depending on how far you lived away from the tip. So, this is a service which is very efficiently run. We get very few complaints about it. I think the fees are competitive with what other local authorities charge, and I think it's only right that we seek to recover the bulk of those costs from the people who actually use the service.
Thank you. And the next question is also for you as well, Nick. How concerned are you that future budgets will be put under greater pressure by the infrastructure and services required to meet the needs created by national house building targets?
Well, of course, house building targets very much to the fore at the moment, with the government having told Wiltshire that the target is to be raised by 84% in due course. So we have what's called a local plan, and that is designed to address the challenges that arise from population growth, economic development, and also provide environmental sustainability. And it aims to strike a balance between those things to preserve the county's natural and cultural heritage and to meet the demands for housing, infrastructure and employment. In developing housing proposals, we have been in regular contact with the health services. So we try to identify the capacity of existing health facilities and, if necessary, where there's a need for new ones. Although I would say that a lot of the decisions over this of that sort of area are down to the National Health Service, and sometimes it can be quite difficult to persuade the NHS that actually people can't get GP appointments in their area, and that probably indicates that there is a shortage of GP services. So we have to do our job to try and represent people and make sure that those concerns are fed through into the health service. One of the objectives of the local plan is that infrastructure requirements need to be appropriately planned, secured and implemented. It's often the case that there is an element of the developer tax, call it what you want, CIL, community infrastructure levy, which goes towards education provision in local schools. And so that is a way that we manage to pay for the increases in those services in the areas where house building goes on. Policies in the local plan also help secure land for new facilities, whatever new facilities that may be required. And we talked about leisure centres and things like that. Well, that could be an element of provision from a developer. So part of the site is set aside for a new facility. Often small play areas, those sorts of things on smaller developments. Those are all the sort of things that are taken into account when new developments are considered, and the local plan is the guide. Is the guide to how those are expected to arise in the coming years.
Thank you very much. The last question is for you, Richard, and that's around safety valve. The term safety valve keeps getting mentioned and the impact that it will have on special educational needs. Could you explain what it is and how challenging is it to provide the support required for SEN around Wiltshire?
Yes, thank you. It's a good point. I mean, we've mentioned SEND in our what we've said tonight, but not this issue of safety valve and the DSG, the schools grants. So funding for education comes from central government, or is supposed to come from central government. We get given it, we pass it on to schools, and there are always arguments about schools say there's not enough. That's an issue they need to take up with central government. We are grossly underfunded in Wiltshire in terms of school provision compared to most of the country. That's a fact. When it comes to special educational needs, this has been becoming increasingly challenging moving forward. You've got an increasing number of children who are getting EHCPs, education, care and health plans, and therefore needing the additional support or being entitled to the additional support that comes with that. And that in itself increases the costs, yet government are not increasing the amount of money that come to councils or to school through councils to schools to fund that, which is absurd because it's supposed to be funded by central government. The last government didn't do it. This government has put a small amount of extra money in, but that's all. There is a deficit there. It's and that's the deficit that applies to most of the councils that provide education services in the country. That deficit sits on our books, technically. It's a technicality. It sits on our books, but it's protected by something called the override. I'm sorry, this is getting really accounting boring now. And the override means while it sits on our books, we're not liable for it. But the override's due to end in March of next year. Now, unless government resolve this, the whole sector, the whole country, will suddenly get to a point where half of all councils have to declare technical bankruptcy because of funding of debt sitting on their books that actually belong to central government. The safety valve programme is a way of trying to ensure that EHCPs are issued sensibly. They're issued where needed, but ideally, if someone has mild learning disabilities, that support goes in much earlier, which would means that the young person gets help quicker, may not need an EHCP, because the most important thing is the help to then make sure that they can deal with the rest of their lives and that they're able to deal with the wider world. It's really frustrating that, and this is according to research that was organised by the County Council Network, provision of education for young people with special educational needs 25 years ago had far better outcomes than provision today, because more of it was delivered in mainstream schools and taught them the life skills that they need to be able to then deal with the wider world. So it's a really tricky area. We are looking to try and do work to limit the number of EHCPs, get people helped earlier. That doesn't mean not issue EHCPs where they're needed. It means get the right help to people at the right time, which is as early as possible. It's very preventative. And hopefully in that process, reduce the overall costs that are coming in as well. I have to be honest, I think central government is going to have to step in at some point in the course of the next financial year to address this more significantly, because there are a lot of councils that are right on the edge of collapsing with this process. We are not there yet, but it is the only sort of financial issue that really does concern me, because it's one that's outside of my control and continues to build up. We will get it under control, but central government really have got to step in to deal with the debt that's been incurred because of policies created by national government.
Thank you, and thank you to Nick. Both of you have been really great this evening with your presentation and answering the questions, so thank you for that. That's all of the questions. Thank you to everyone who submitted the questions. I'll hand back to you, Richard, to bring tonight's session to a close.
Thank you. So tonight's session's been recorded. If you want to watch it back, if you want to check on any of the bits that were said, or share it with people who weren't able to join, please do. Keep an eye on our social media feeds, and we will make sure a link comes up there and it comes up on our newsletter as well. And on that note, if you want to keep in touch with the Wiltshire Council, get our news and information, please do subscribe to our newsletter at wiltshire.gov.uk. You can find the sign up link there. So thank you all very much for attending. Thank you to Nick and Kerry for presenting as well. On behalf of all of us, thank you for giving up your evening, and I hope you have a good rest of the week. Thank you. Bye.